real business and commercial challenge, which leads organizations to integrate data from various sources. The identities play an essential role in this process by securing access to data, since they move control. But the first question is how to deploy these identity in complete confidence, and how can that be? Can the standards guarantee a minimum level of security for digital identities? I'm happy to have here Stéphane Mavel. You're in charge of partner relations in France Connect. I can speak. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Armand Eslot, you are head of expertise service with CNIL. Hugo Magna, you're head of project of digital identity and digital trust in ANSSI. Yann Aguet, you are EVP identity in IN Group. Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Yann Aguet. I'm happy to be part of this roundtable. Yes, there was a change in the speaker at the last minute. So let's start with the news. It's very rich, especially in France and in Europe. Let's start with France. Stéphane, I'll start with you. A lot of news with France Connect. Yes, France Connect is 38 million of citizens in France that already use it or have used it. More than 1,500 websites that have integrated this device, and it's continuing to increase. So this is a part that you're familiar with, that is there to simplify access to digital information. And we launched a new platform, France Connect Plus, that allows to safeguard and secure identity, digital identity, and allows to protect at substantial and higher level with EIDAS. And it allows the realization of digital services with better guarantee levels. Can we give examples of these services? More sensitive services? Oh, there are so many. But today, some of you have perhaps used Ma Procuration en ligne for the presidential elections. It's one of the services that can be accessed if you don't want to go through the police station when you have to mandate someone. And obviously, this is a service that's very, very sensitive from the Interior Ministry. But just to give you an example, just opening a bank account 100% online, it's possible with a substantial level. Otherwise, you have to send a scan of your ID card or go from a different bank account, so delegate, for example. So I bounce back on a different kind of news, the application France Identités. It's not the full name yet. It's not finalized. If you have the new ID card, the electronic ID card, and a phone with an NFC chip, you have this application that allows you to authentify with France Connect. And there's a decree that came end of April that defines the law framework of SGIN that allows to have access to these 1,500 services that you talked about earlier. Yes, absolutely. It's an application that's already in a beta mode, and it will be part of France Connect Galaxy in a few months at a low level. It will be a new supplier of digital identity, and it will come later with France Connect Plus, and we will include the France Identité Numérique towards the end of the year, and we will also include Ariane Next, which is called Iris, which also is at a substantial level. So end of the year 2022, we will have two suppliers behind France Connect Plus, the Post Office, La Poste, because already it's behind the France Connect Plus, Ariane and France Identité Connect. So, IN Group, can you remind us, Yann, what it's about? So, IN Group, for those of you who don't know it yet, it's the commercial name of the national printing company. And so the identities were really paper-based in a secure way, and they're migrating towards the digital format. So to come back on what has been said concerning the France Identité Numérique application, I would like to express two opinions. First of all, with my hat, I'm in charge of the security part that we are bringing together states and companies, and we're looking at this application and how it will be used, and how the new ID card will contain this that came out halfway through last year. And also I'm enthusiastic because we've been waiting for this for a long time. And with this now launch, we're entering in this new phase, which is to have several uses around this digital identity. The second topic and the second type of reaction, it's with my hat focused on the IN Group, the printing company, national printing company. We're very happy to have this company in the manufacturing of the digital ID card. I told you, based on the specifications of the National Agency of Secure Titles, it's through the application France Identité Numérique. This container will be activated, and it will allow different citizens to be able to have a digital identity on their card and also to have it on their wallet. And it's really fundamental, it's essential for France to have gone through this approach to have a digital identity on the ID card and also to be able to have it on a wallet. It's the idea to keep the function and the inclusive role of this double approach. On one hand, on a secure title element, and on another space, which is a digital wallet. Why do I say this? And perhaps it's to share an experience, which is not in France, but abroad, because we have a group that works abroad. I will perhaps develop it in a few minutes. So there is a very small state that is at the border of France, which is Monaco, where we deployed about a year ago, a solution that's quite similar to what we're doing in France. So the state of Monaco asked us to deploy a physical identity for residents and a digital ID. And this can be in the title and in the wallet of the portal. What I find that's very interesting is what kind of learning we can take from this after a year having experienced this. The first learning is that there is an adoption rate with the people from Monaco that's quite impressive with the digital identity, because it's between 90 and 95% of people who go and look for digital identity and decide to activate the digital ID. And so when we ask people who do not want to activate the digital ID, the most frequent answer is that they have the feeling that they want to keep in hand the data that's on their card. If they have the physical movement of bringing out their card, the physical card, and show it, instead of leaving it accessible in a digital world. Perhaps we smile at this, but I'm assuming that in each country we will have a percentage of people that will be a bit worried to adopt this digital identity. Another interesting topic is where this balance, we imagine that people will come through on this translation of the digital ID on the card and on the mobile. The top over level is lower because about a third of the people from Monaco don't go on their cell phones. Perhaps it's a matter of generation, and we can understand it's a lot more systematic for younger generations and perhaps more complicated for older generations. There are no limitations, as you can imagine, in terms of material, because, I mean, NFC phone is quite present in Monaco, I can assure you. But again, there is a reluctance not to leave the digital identity in the wallet, And perhaps there's also some misunderstanding and there's some education to take place. But perhaps there's a mix between the information on the phone and other kind of applications. And there's a feeling that the division between these two is not perfect, so people are a bit confused about it. So this shows two things. On one hand is that clearly we have to be able to listen to citizens in their concerns and how they want to adopt the digital ID if we want it to be a success. The second learning is that we have to give use cases. What is it that allows the success in Monaco is that from the beginning, the government there thought about a number of use cases, and I think it's an important terminology, and we choose from the beginning as soon as we make available, we open the digital ID, to have some use cases that are public use cases, like what France Connect is suggested in France, but also private use cases, like access to Monaco Telecom, and it's already connected on the identity in Monaco. So I think that's interesting to have this kind of approach, because it shows how sensitive this is and the shortcuts we can take on the capacity to adopt for most of the citizens this digital identity. We'll come back on France with you, Hugo Magna. You represent ANSSI. What is the role of ANSSI in digital identity? I think that Jan has talked about it a bit. I want to make sure that the microphone works. Jan spoke about it a bit. To make sure that there is an approval and adoption of this, we bring this expertise because our role is on the digital identity, is to evaluate the elements of the digital identity. And I think you know the norms. You know that there's the IDAS, the Identification on Services, and ANSSI is the branch that's in charge of controlling this. It's evaluating the platforms that give these digital identities. We work a lot with France Connect and Stéphane and her teams to see what is the level of security on the platform, how we can accompany them, and we evaluate the digital identities. And for example, there's the postal company was evaluated and give a guarantee, and we will be able to evaluate as well other digital identities. We talked about Yannex. There is the one that will be suggested by the team of France Identités. So our role is to be able to evaluate the digital identities and to participate in the European framework on this topic. What's interesting is you were talking about earlier about the three levels, so weak, substantial, and high. So ANSSI is not the one that has invented these. These are linked to a European level. So this is again EIDAS. And there are specialists here in the hall, so I'm sorry, I'm going to simplify this. So low, it's just basically a password, an ID and a password. So France Connect, if you want to access, you can have just an ID and a password. Substantial, if I can compare it to the physical space from a distance, when you want to verify the identity from afar, you want to see the person in front of you. For example, when you're at the counter, there's someone who sees you. So to give you an example, for example, when you go to the post office, someone is there at the counter to get your package, or at the bank office to open a bank account. So someone that has a certain capacity and competence to assess the ID of the person. And on the high level, these are people who have a lot more training and have elements that allow them to verify the authentication of the title. So we're trying to find secure elements. So here we have skills that is the Ministry of Interior and the different elements of the customs and CGN for example, the criminal research of the Gendarmerie Nationale and so on. So the aim of ANSSI is to make sure to take in account the requirements. Also, you mentioned the different frameworks in which you work. And so what are the different cycles of life of an identity, from the fact that it's activated, the usage, and it's revoked? So all these steps will be looked at in the framework of the digital ID. So, for example, when we talk about verification of an ID, before being able to give someone a digital ID, a certificate, something that proves, we have to verify your ID. So on this process, we realize that there's really a lack on the market. So we worked in terms of building up this and create some kind of a reference to clarify the laws of the game. So we share with the other ones in the ecosystem to understand how the system works. And so we built the PEVID reference, and this allows us concretely to value the suppliers and to verify the identity afar. And so, for example, there will be a camera, you'll present your ID, and the actor there will be able to check the authenticity of this title. There's a live net detection. We make sure that the person in front of the phone is alive. And so it's simple to see in person, but when you're afar, it's different. And then compare elements of the face. So compare on the ID and the person on the phone that is correspondent to the title. So these are some of the elements we're working on. We're accompanying actors on these topics, and our function. So PEVID is also perhaps our target on this, but we want to push these at a European level, these standards, because it's useless to have a solution that cannot then be deployed at a European level. So that's really an important step. And the idea of this PEVID reference is to be able to deploy it at a European level. Armand, you represent CNIL. If you come back to the application France Identité Numérique, what was the position of CNIL? So CNIL obviously is not against the idea that citizens have a digital ID. On the contrary, but obviously it has to be in accordance with the law linked to the GDPR in Europe. And this is something that is put in place by the government to manipulate the data of the citizens. So it's overseen by the CNIL. And so the previous system, ALICEM, had approval of the CNIL, and the Commission was able to have a look at this new application and gave its own approval that was made public by the ministry, where CNIL was saying that there was some advances on the system that was giving good results. So was there a good cooperation between CNIL and different ministry? Yes, of course. It's quite some time that the CNIL is following digital identity and with France Connect. So obviously CNIL is an independent entity. So the government decides to put in place these projects and put in place these devices. CNIL then intervenes in terms of external element, but there have been several exchanges to understand and to suggest some elements. So we want to bring in privacy by design to make sure that there are mechanisms that protect the private life of the system. So many functionalities of this application are, for example, being able to have digital identity that can be, you can send an original document, to have a procuration, inscription for the electoral votes, opening a bank account. It's a really long list. Yes. I kind of brought it in at the beginning, but it's really infinite. And it's not only linked to this identity. Each identity, as they have substantial level, allow to have access to a galaxy of new use cases that require today whether to send some scanned elements or perhaps even go in person to a counter, because these cannot be digitalized yet. So the field is positive, it's huge. And it's on this that in the last year we've been working in France Connect quite intensely with the ministries and the private actors, because we are as open to the private entities, France Connect and France Connect Plus, to make sure that these services that require a better warranty are able to develop and allow these digital identities of substantial level to be deployed as fast as possible with the citizens. Because this is always the issue, the challenge, that you can deploy something, but if there's no use cases, the citizens will take it but then forget that they have it. and then you will have again go through the effort of reactivate it several months later. So the ecosystem has to be put in place with both sides, from the government side, from the public services, but also from the private side, that can integrate these elements. So you were saying earlier that it's long, it's expensive, this process, this digital ID. Yes, the supply of digital identity, yes. One of the questions you asked me when we were preparing this is, how come we are so late? Because in France, compared to other countries, we don't really have a digital ID, a high-quality digital ID in France. We have the one of the post office, and the other ones are coming. How come? It's because it's very expensive for the suppliers of digital ID to really position themselves on this identity. Hugo mentioned it. There are audit processes that are extremely rigorous and long. And in terms of private actors, we're lucky to have had the post office that never left us, Ayanex that never left us, and finally the Ministry of Interior that's also coming. But it requires investments, and it requires an economic model that is not completely defined in France. Hugo, why is it so difficult to position ourselves on this digital ID question? It's a good question. I will try to respond. I think that there are several topics. Of course, we're on the roundtable of security of data. As a member of ANSSI, as a citizen actually, tomorrow if I want to use a digital ID, so I have quite a few criteria and requirements so that my data are well protected in that framework. So there is a topic of security that's certain, and it's not small. There's expertise required. It's not just about security of data, but it's also how can I verify the identity of a person. All this triptych in terms of business and cyber, we have to take care of it, and they're quite complex. So you need to have some expertise. So Jan here talked about it. The actors that come from the titles, these are not skills and capacities that are small for actors. So it has a cost, and it's a cost to have people that are able to take care of these issues. And then there are evaluations that we're doing. So we're having centers of evaluation to do several evaluations, and these evaluations have a cost. So I don't think this is the main expense. The main expense is human in terms of skills to be able to deal with this topic. And as the economic model is not always very certain, it's difficult for smaller actors to position themselves on this issue. Jan, do you want to say something? I just wanted to confirm what Hugo said. I think that it's simple on paper to improvise oneself as a supplier of digital ID, because all of us have in mind this infrastructure that is required. But this issue of digital identity, we realize that there are many criteria and security issues and challenges. We talked about data, private data and personal data. And it's difficult to just venture to have the required expertise to confront all these issues, because at some stage, what you give to your cell phone or the information you put in your chip, you have to make sure that there is a security, a stability, capacity to show that what is the data in there is according to some kind of norm and standard. And so this work probably slows down the progression of the digital ID in France. I'm coming back to what Hugo says. In terms of citizen, I'm quite reassured that this kind of approach and these limits need to be taken into account at a French level. I also wanted to talk about, from a personal pace, and Hugo won't be against this, I think that even though France kind of jumped on the wagon on this, and we will talk about the European initiative, the strength of France is to bring also the maturity of reflection on security and GDPR. So the influence that ANSSI can have is really interesting because it's trying to reposition the real topics at the heart, at the core of the European discussion. And we'll talk about it later, especially on the security issues. And you can understand that to have interoperability across countries goes through putting in place some prerequisites. And this is obvious perhaps on paper, but it's much harder to put in place. And I leave to your imagination the difference that can be between our worries and the world that Hugo and Armand were talking about. And other countries, Poland, not to talk about one specifically, there is really a willingness to open the whole topics to Apple and let them manage their wallet. So all of this is being put in place. It goes through putting in place a minimum, because obviously you have to go through clear rules from different actors, between different actors, and that's the challenge in Europe. Armand, you wanted to say something? Yes, just to agree with Jan, in terms of the vision of the regulator, what is interesting for us in CNIL is protecting individuals. So the question we ask all the time is, what are the consequences for the individuals? The digital ID and the consequence for people are very big, are very high. There's identity theft and all other issues that come out of that. So open credits. So the fact that it's complex to create a digital identity, obviously there's a topic of opening the competition, but we don't want to take shortcuts. We're not doing some kind of surgery in a coffee house, but it goes through people, because if we don't do this work, if we don't have this level of requirement, we will have big consequences for people that are unacceptable. This image of the surgery in the coffee house is really very clear. So you're talking about the context, which is the European context, 2022. It's really a hinge year, very strong in the digital era in Europe, and to secure data for millions of citizens with partners here. So the 27 member states are putting in place the rules and the norms and the toolbox that allow the deployment of the new digital identity for 2025, and that's really tomorrow. So in the framework of EIDAS, version 2, V2, it opens to all the countries of the Union and the companies, allowing access from cell phones and applications. Jan, perhaps a comment on this context, European context? Yes, I'm not going to repeat a topic that perhaps has already been talked about in other roundtables, the European digital wallet. I think that you've already heard about that in the last few days. Just perhaps to give you 3 or 4 elements to help us understanding this topic. Clearly, I would like to say I'm very optimistic about what has happened with the sanitary pass last year, where Europe showed that 27 and perhaps even more, because the European pass went beyond the 27 countries of the European Union, was able to really put something together very quickly. And it gives me confidence, the capacity of Europe tomorrow to be able to define a European wallet across Europe. To come back on the work on the European Union, obviously there are 2 axes that require some work. And Hugo and Stéphane will be able to go more in detail if necessary. And these require us to work on the standards and the norms and regulations of the version 2, and also to define an architecture in principle, and also generic of what we called toolbox, which is the way that this will be put in place, this European inter-European wallet. And looking at the works that are about to take place, there was a call that was launched so that private and public consortiums can organize themselves in countries and put some experimentation in terms of use cases and verifying the levels of security and interoperability around this architecture and these principles. And in this respect, and I think it's not new, it's not because the prefect has already announced it in France, there has been a call to see the interest about a month and a half, and the consortium of French industrials like the Post Office, Thales, ENG Group really brought together a number of people in the business sector, and with INC and France Connect to bring the French colors around this initiative and launch some use suggestions and test possibilities in terms of main use cases of this digital identity, and also showing the interoperability with other European partners. I'll give you 3 examples. Even though in the European Union the discussion is talking about one use per country or by consortium or several use cases, but just to give you a little bit an idea of what we're trying to cover in terms of our experimentation. So there are some demonstrations of interoperability of the bank field. So how the secure information coming out of the substantial identity can allow to open a bank account. All of us have lived this and we know how important this is. And also there are some demonstrations around connection to public services. Stéphane will be able to talk about much more than I will with France Connect. And it's how to have a reliable identity with a substantial level can allow you to connect to a public service. All of us filled in our tax sheets, and I'm quite happy not to have had to go and find my password to connect. And also the right to drive, which the possibility when you're going to rent a car from a network of different cars to prove that quite easily your identity and your capacity to drive, that you have a driver's license and you have your points for this driver's license. So I must admit that I'm passionate about this topic, because every time I rented a car, I was quite amazed at the way in which they were copying my ID card, my passport, my driving license, and I kept on asking, what are you going to do with all of this? And no one could ever tell me in a very reassuring way what they were doing. Some would say that they were leaving it in the drawer and that they would destroy it at some stage. Some people didn't know, and some people would say, no, we'll put it on a centralized server, and next time maybe we won't need to ask you again to scan your passport. So I got worried about this in terms of CNIL, and I will let them answer this. But seriously, from the initiatives, what is very interesting is that around this national consortiums, there is a work in terms of deadline that is quite interesting for French people, which is 17th of August. We have to submit a proposal for Europe, and the consortiums, at least the national groups, are coming together around a big consortium that we belong to with the ANSI, and so on, that brings together 17 countries. And so the opportunity to show at a large scale the capacity to have this interoperability at this level. So I'm really enthusiastic about this, and this will be an important step to launch this digital identity, in particular in France, but show that it goes across. This is where we are, showing that in terms of our consortium, I will use a terminology, I hope that Hugo will not be upset, but we have a structure and architecture in terms of this consortium that's quite vertical, which means that most of the approach of security and identification stays with one actor at a high level of trust, which is the state, that then certifies and delivers some kind of digital identity, and their attributes are provided by different types of partner railings that come and lean on this royal identity to give attributes. You have to know that other consortiums are also being put together, having more of a horizontal approach, so leaning on a trusted third party that can certify a number of attributes. And we'll talk about this later.
So, Armand, maybe a reaction Yeah, it's a subject that we are following up. There is the question of the wallet with the project of unique identifier for individuals that is raising questions. The CNIL has been created in order to react to such a project, so we are following up this closely. And we are working on a European project. So it is question of a European project with the GDPR, and it's the same for the EDAS government, so it will be applied the same way in Europe. But for this kind of text, the European Commission is asking the CEPD for his opinion to know his opinion of on the text. So it was made for VIA, for the different regulations that were approved recently, and there will probably be an opinion on the subject, and we'll look at this closely. Maybe we'll make some recommendations regarding this unique identifier. Stephanie, yeah, we are following this closely also because it is about a new services provider that could integrate our network in 2025. We are insisting on the fact that it is very difficult to deploy an identity. We are nearly all the 27 member states with an existing system with the COVID identities that were deployed with a lot of investments because it was not easy. So we don't want all this to be fragilized by the arrival of the wallet. So we would prefer to see this wallet integrate the Galaxy France Connect Plus as its launch, but we are the heart of French interoperability of uses, and this interoperability with the regulation IDAS B1 is not a success. So wallet should improve these uses, but we shouldn't forget that many of our uses are at national level, so interoperability is important, but we are building the France Connect Plus system. That's our priority on our side. So I will give the floor to Hugo, but I will also say that in 10 minutes you will have the opportunity to ask your questions. Hugo, what's the position of ANSSI? The position of ANSSI is clear. ANSSI will bring an expertise in terms of cybersecurity. Armand touched upon that, on data that will be around this galaxy. So in order to summarize such a subject, today we have 3 tracks in order to simplify the things. You have the legislative tracks, the discussions between the member states to know what will be written in this proposal. And we at ANSSI, we really know this question, so we are supporting the different member states and the Commission in order to bring our expertise at the European level. Secondly, we have the technical level. We spoke about the toolbox that should enable to be more specific on the wallet, and there is also the industrial level. That it means that the stakeholders in the industry have to be able to anticipate all the things. So it was a good idea from the Commission to launch experimentation to see which are the stakeholders ready to position themselves, ready to test this new project. I think it's a really good initiative, and we have a real interest to see which are the safety modalities that can be proposed in order for us to be as ready as possible to certify and to validate this project. Today, we are working on a model in which you have an identifying ship that has been approved in order to ensure the safety of the data around this ship. Tomorrow, you will need with the wallet that we will need to rely on a smartphone in order to store ID data, my name, my surname, my age. and also providing new features, for instance, to access a service requiring that I have 18 years old, that I am 18 years old, then maybe I won't agree to scan my ID card, so it will be able just to understand, to show that the person is older than 18 years old, rather than scanning the whole idea. Yes, Armand, Stéphane, maybe do you want to react? So, last point that I wanted to touch upon with you, Yann. At the end of April, several French companies, Suez, Docapost, Archipel, ING Group, or the Lille University, have signed a manifesto in favor of an auto-sovereign identity. Could you please explain that and compare that with what you said towards the vertical mechanisms? Yes, I don't want to oppose the two initiatives, but yes, there is a new approach aiming at seeing which infrastructure is necessary in order to have an auto-sovereign identity. With with a solution, a blockchain solution on self-sovereign identity. And we were taking part to this initiative with the idea to have one infrastructure, and we are also taking part to the France Alliance for the Blockchain. For this infrastructure, to have the minimal prerequisite of safety and traceability for the data. And I think this is linked to the subject of today, that's to say what's important in all this digital ID. What's the point? The point is the importance to focus on European preoccupations, on European issues, putting at the center of the subject the GDPR. I think we could speak for hours around the GDPR, but also the capacity to have guarantees about the data storage in terms of flows between one services provider and a user, and also being sure that at the end of the day the user has still a control on his or her data. So we should put the issue on a horizontal way, seeing things in a complementary approach, but because I think all these elements are at the heart of the issue, but what should be also at the heart of the issue is the consumer and the individuals. If you still have time, please come and see our stand, IN Group, and you will see what has been done on the data hubs. The data hubs are based on the blockchain, allowing the farmers to share their farming informations with the industry, and this is showing clearly the interest that such an approach can have. So for a farmer, it's to be able to share his data in order to sell some products, and so the farmers can decide to share their farming data or not for the industry to have access to them, because the industry is going to use this data. And so this is a new initiative with the objective, which objective is to have an infrastructure with guarantees. Hugo, maybe you want to react on this horizontal decentralized approach. I think it's really interesting. But the EDOS regulation is an open one. the regulation won't say if you need to do something in a centralized or decentralized way. And so both options have to be observed, discussed, putting the individual at the center of the issue. So we'll evaluate a framework. We'll need to have a framework in order to evaluate the European wallets with different technologies, and we'll need to ensure a certain harmonization, safety speaking. Jan, you signed the manifesto, and so in this manifesto, what do you say? Do you say that you will allow the companies to work on this European wallet, so the safety will be outsourced to private companies? So your question is a kind of provocation. In order to answer your question, I think we all agree that, for instance, in France, we have a digital identity. When it will be available in France, several platforms such as Google, Facebook, etc., will use this kind of identity. This is okay. We're not worried about that. But then going beyond saying that Apple will create wallets, and I don't have any problems with the quality of the Apple wallets, but this could be the fact that this could become a national identity. No, I think that the European initiative was about aiming at creating them and framing all this new approach. The objective is to have one digital identity. I think private initiatives should be complementary to this initiative, but as far as the digital identity is concerned, it should be at the level of the states, and maybe there will be a whole ecosystem of different digital identities that will rely on this kind of technology, maybe blockchain or the initiative of securing the data with companies being private or public companies. I will give you 2 examples explaining the kind of uses that won't be at the national level. So the first will be in the north of Europe. The notion of professional identity is not linked to the national identity. So the right of an employee has the right to not to be linked to the national identity, and this provides new opportunities for new initiatives for which the level of trust will depend on the employer. So this is for my first example. And I was also talking about Monaco, and we are also working on the African continent. You should know that we have more horizontal initiatives that can also be a way to bring support to African countries within the framework of creating a trustful framework. In Africa, there are multiple identity systems, and these systems are not coherent. You have the identity from your driving license, from your passport, and sometimes these identities are not linked. And what's the level of trust linked to all that? We could create embryos of digital identities. Next week in Marrakesh, there will be an event talking about that under the umbrella of UNICEF. And so in this approach, they created a lot of embryos of identity. So each citizen that is born everywhere in the world will have at least one embryo of identity. And how do we do that? That's at birth, both parents will have a reference. Maybe the chief of the village will provide some information, and this with data, these data will be put in a blockchain, and this will create the identity. So for you, maybe it's normal in a Western country, but this is essential in order to create an identity at the level of a country. And I think this will be the future. Okay, then I will stop. Stéphane, maybe you want to react? Yes, I will try to be shorter. I just wanted to say that in France we have different identity providers that are not at the level of the states. We have created a decentralization with the possibility to private and public actors, stakeholders, to provide identifiers without being the Ministry of Interior. And so we have the choice to choose different providers. And also something I wanted to add, decentralization, we are doing it with the opening of a country. So once the citizen has proven his identity, we have APIs allowing to collect complementary data with blockchain identity, but also without. And what we are heading to is to be able to collect data that are different from the identity data, and we will do this thanks to the decentralization. So I think it was important mentioning that. So thank you, Stéphane. You have a question?
Alors la question, donc je le dis pour ceux qui...
So the question is, what about the data exploitation? For France Tech, we are not exploiting data. We are a service providers, and the data are from an identity data provider. So we are controlling that the identity corresponds to the citizen. These controls are made with the INCYBER. We are controlling that this person is existing, is not dead, and then we provide that to the service provider, and we are not storing this data. And sometimes it's a problem because when we are facing some problems, when we have some ID cases, it is difficult to find back the data. When we have cases of identity theft. But I think that today we were talking about reinforcing the digital identity that will allow us to improve the citizens' experiences with that. I think we were talking about that during this roundtable. Yes, I wanted to add, being brief, I promise I will be brief. First of all, the main difference between a GAFAM seeing the data, personal data, as a mine of, as a treasure with high value, we have a different approach. We want to make available for citizens devices allowing them to have a control on data to protect their data. And the example I was providing with data is really clear. So how to protect personal data, such as the one of the farmers, for the farmers to have control on their data and to choose with whom and when they want to share it. So our main function is to ensure the farmer that the data will only be available for those he chooses to, and that the data will be protected. So we still have 5 minutes for 1 or 2 questions. Yes.
Alors,
j'ai entendu.
Vous pouvez reformuler la
Donc en fait,
question.
aujourd'hui,
So the question is, today, for CNIL, we need to have an alternative solution to France Connect. So with France Connect Plus, will this alternative be present? The objective of the alternative is allowing people who don't have a digital identity to have access to the service. We'll see what the Commission will say. I am working for the Commission, but I am not the Commission. And some services, for some services, you can't only rely on a digital identity. You will still need to have a physical locket for people to go to. And I think there has been a recent decision from the Council of States on this point, where the question was, can we oblige people to go through a digital channel? And the opinion of the CNIL at the time was that we needed a digital alternative. So we are asking for a digital alternative. But we could have an alternative that is not digital, because some people can't have access to the digital world. So our position is that we should have an alternative to France Plus or France Connect. There should be another mean in order to have access to this service without the digital identity. And the last question, yes, madam?
Quid des langues utilisées?
alors ça c'est...
Je vais vous faire un retour d'expérience.
So there was no topic at the European level. I am not saying that it's good or not good, but we are speaking in English with the different member states, and the documents are translated by the European Commission itself.
Je ne suis pas certain de savoir ce que vous vouliez dire.
I'm not sure about your question.
Alors, en tout cas, pour être honnête, sur ces sujets-là, tout le monde parle anglais.
I think that we are all speaking in English around the table. We are all speaking in English.
Une dernière question, allez-y. Donc, évolution de la gestion des données dans l'entreprise.
So we are speaking about the evolution of data. So we didn't touch upon this data. Yes, we were focused on digital identity based on a person rather than speaking about the access. I am not going to enter into details, but at the INCYBER we have the expertise. The first point is that we were talking about the safety around in the framework of the EDAS regulation with solutions of identification, solutions for IAM, PANS, etc. Different actors that are certified in this fields. We have the capacity to certify these solutions. That's to say, to check these solutions with the norms validated by the ANSI and validate them. This allows to beneficiaries, ministries, and different organisms to know on the market which solutions can fill their gaps. So this is the first answer. But it's not for all the citizens. It's, for instance, a small SME won't be able to deploy such an IAM solution. And so we have also a support part helping small companies with to secure their structure, their architecture at the level of ANSI. I'm sorry, I make some advertisements here, but we have all these things on our stand, the ANSI stand in digital formats, and we also have that on the paper. Thank you to all our 4 panelists.